Hey, what's up guys? JP313 here, and today I'm going to be making a tutorial video on peak shooting. We're going to talk about why peak shooting is so important in the current state of the game, the different forms of peak shooting, and how you can implement peak shooting into your own gameplay. So without further ado, let's jump right into it.
Anybody know why jiggle peeking's like the skill gap in a game that's like 3 years old?
Alright guys, now that you heard it from SSG Bound himself, you don't have to take my word for it. So the reason peak shooting is so powerful in the current state of the game is that it allows you to play your life stronger, it allows you to play your power position stronger, and it actually gives you opportunities to hold off multiple enemies at a time. With the bandit rifle being a single fire weapon, in order to counter someone who's peak shooting, you have to time your shots perfectly. Whereas when we start with the battle rifle, you could pre-fire the angle that the person is peak shooting from, and even if your first bullet doesn't hit, your second or your third could still potentially hit. Once you start implementing peak shooting, you'll realize that you can deal out a lot more damage while taking minimal damage. You can deal out damage while you're weak or one shot, and it actually gives you opportunities to turn around gunfights where you're down 2, 3, even 4 shots sometimes. You'll also find yourself living in a lot more scenarios where you would have normally died in. There are a few different ways that you can peek. You can jiggle peek, you can peek side to side, you can jump peek, and you can actually crouch peek, which is similar to head glitching. The easiest and most fundamental option is jiggle peeking. Jiggle peeking is basically when you peek in and out of one side of cover. What I love about this option is the ease and simplicity of it. The majority of your aiming is going to be done using your left stick because you're going to preset your reticle where your opponent was last seen. Since your reticle should already be on or near target as you step outside of cover, it should make it a lot easier to hit your shot. You're going to want to set your reticle in such a way that you have to step outside of cover minimally in order to line your target up. The main advantage that you hold in the gunfight when implementing peak shooting is that your opponent has to time his shots perfectly in order to hit you. The bandit rifle is very punishing for missing shots because it's a single fire weapon. It's important to understand that when you're jiggle peeking specifically, your opponent can pre-fire the angle that you're peeking from. So if you find that you're getting hit every time that you peek, you might want to off-rhythm your peeks to throw your opponent's timing off. It's also important to note that as you retract into cover, there's a lapse in information, so your opponent could have moved. It happens, you have to be able to make a quick right stick adjustment to snap back on the target. However, what you'll find is that a lot of opponents will actually stand still and try to sit on their shots, especially if you're weak or one shot. They'll try to time your peeks and simply hit their shots, making it incredibly easy for you to peek out and hit your shots. Another advantage that you have is that you have the cover and your opponent does not. So if at any point you feel as though you're not hitting your shots or you're losing the engagement, you can simply tuck behind cover and just play your life. And you still might end up dying, but you're essentially buying your team more time, and you could end up forcing your opponent to take a route that exposes him to angles that your teammates have in order to kill you. So even if you don't end up getting the kill, if you accomplish either of those two outcomes, I would say you played your life the best you could, and in fact, sometimes buying your team more time is the difference between you winning and losing the game. While jiggle peeking isn't as dynamic as some other forms of peeks, it's still extremely effective. Even at the highest level, you'll see players implementing this form of peeking. Another form of peeking will be side-to-side peeking. This form of peeking can be a little bit more dynamic in the sense that you're giving your opponent two different dilemmas. You're giving him a timing dilemma as well as a positioning dilemma. So not only will he have to time his shots right, but he'll also have to readjust his reticle based on your positioning. It's important to note that there's two ways to approach side-to-side peeking. You can approach it passively or you can approach it aggressively. So what I mean by that is if you're approaching it passively, you're basically repositioning to one side of the pillar, lining your reticle up with the pivot point, and allowing your opponent to walk into your reticle and fire your shot, and then reposition to the other side of the pillar. If you're approaching it aggressively, you're repositioning to one side of the pillar with the intent to initiate the battle, and you're snapping onto target, and then repositioning onto the other side of the pillar. So approaching it aggressively takes a little bit more skillful aiming because you'll have to readjust your reticle and snap on the target before firing your shot and repositioning to the other side. So here's a good example of what I mean by approaching it passively. Notice how on my last shot, I just stay calm, I line my reticle up with the pivot point, and I allow my opponent to expose himself to my reticle and fire my shot and get the kill. So in essence, side-to-side peeking can be a little bit more dynamic than jiggle peeking because you're giving your opponent two different dilemmas rather than just one. However, that doesn't mean it's better or worse. Oftentimes, learned in Halo is that sometimes doing less with more can be more effective. You'll see players trying to do too much a lot of times. For example, if you're side-to-side peeking but you're missing all of your shots, then obviously that's not incredibly effective. This is particularly true when you watch people strafe. Sometimes people's strafes are just so spastic it's forcing them to miss their own shots, and it's not the desired outcome that we're looking for. However, if you're feeling extra cracked that day and you want a side-to-side peek to make yourself a little bit more tricky and you're able to hit your shots, then that's okay too. The other two forms of peeking would be jump peeking and crouch peeking. These are relatively self-explanatory, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. Jump peeking is basically when you jump behind a box to gain a sight line, and crouch peeking is when you crouch behind a box that's about waistline level, and then uncrouch to gain a sight line. I described all of these peek shooting options individually, but you don't have to use them in isolation. You can actually use them in combos, which is the most effective way to integrate them into your gameplay. For example, if you're behind a box, you can peek left, you can peek right, and then you can add a jump peek at the end, make yourself a little bit more tricky. One of my favorite places to peek from is Nest on Wildfire, because there's a variety of peeking options. They have an option to peek to the side. You can jump peek.
Watching down from
There's like a
zombies.
platform on top of the wall from that, so you can
bridge.
jump on top of that and implement some crouch peeking. There's a variety of escape options as well. So get as creative as you want with it, and remember, practice makes perfect, so make sure to go into Academy or practice with a friend. And if you do end up implementing peek shooting, let me know how it works within your own gameplay in the comments.